Hello, and welcome back to another Augury Devlog video. In this video, we go over the work that we've done for the last 10 months. Since I don't have as much to talk about, I'll start first. When we last left off, I said I was done with the overworld terrain generation and was on to caves. If any of you watch Randall working on Arcana, you'll be familiar with the character Professor Rework. I have my own Professor Rework who just keeps at me to keep making the world generation better. And since this is a core mechanic of the game, we need it to be as fast as possible. The old system would take as much as 100 milliseconds to generate an entire biome, which just isn't acceptable. Before we took our break from making videos, I stated that the world generation would need to be spread across multiple frames to keep the game running at a stable 60 frames per second. Midway through the implementation of that, Chess came to me asking me to show him how my implementation of Perlin noise worked for a feature that he will talk about later. Unfortunately, for what he was wanting to use it for, we would have needed a shader, so I set out to make one to fit the need. In that process, we figured out that we can use a shader to make the noise generation. It could be significantly faster and possibly even generate simple terrain in a single frame. So now, we are basically back to where we were almost a year ago, which feels like a never-ending cycle. With that said, though, it is all for the purpose of making sure that there is enough performance left for the rest of the game. These segments of development can be tedious, but I feel it's a necessity to get this right before we move forward. As before, the caves are still next on the list of what I will be working on. As it stands, Augury as we've shown it is a bare bones game, and we want to have everyone understand more what the game is about. A large part of Augury's planned gameplay loop takes place underground in the caves. Caves consist of multiple styles of rooms from treasure to enemies to puzzles, and are discovered as the player sends units deeper into the ground. As we come to the point of implementing caves properly into Augury, the gameplay loop will change significantly as the progression system begins to lie on the addition of them. The final bit of work that I've been doing over this time is making a somewhat finalized version of the title video. At first, this began as a mega object with a lot of hard-coded information before Yo-Yo Games added sequences to GameMaker. After the 2.3 update, I converted it into a sequence that was easier to edit. However, I found that it wasn't really able to handle the thousands of particles needed for the flare at the end. That's when I started looking at a solution to make a video and play that video in GameMaker Studio. I knew that it was possible because games such as Hyper Light Drifter actually have video files that play at the beginning and end of the game. I started by digging for any info I could find on how they were getting their videos to play, and I found that they were using an extension called CCT Video Player. Unfortunately, that extension is abandonware and doesn't work with GameMaker Studio 2.3, so the search continued. I came across some leads, but sadly nothing fits the needs. Luckily though, there is a promising extension in development that I'm watching very closely. That does it for me, but Ches has some very interesting feature additions to go over.
Since the last devlog, I've been working on mainly systems that deal with units, but also some other things that deal with the overworld as well, and in terms of the basic gameplay loop. So one of the first things I did was I worked on implementing range combat into the game. Our artist Yuritsa had some animations done for quite a while. I was just working on finishing up the melee animations for the Guardians and trying to sort of consolidate all of that code into like an inheritance tree that will be modular and easily used not only for the units that the player controls, but also for the enemy NPCs or the passive NPCs that might be roaming around the world as well. So for the range combat in particular, I chose to use 3 different attack angles. So that's 3 different animations for when the Guardian is actually attacking. We chose to do this because there's hills in Augury, unlike other side-scrolling RTS games, so meaning the angle of attack that they could be attacking from could vary widely based on the distance that the target they're shooting at is at, and also the target might be over a hill or way down below the Guardian. So there's a lot of different angles that they might have to attack from. So we went with that method, and you'll be able to see that on screen. The them attacking from the different angles. And how I actually went about making the Guardians fire in those arcs that you're seeing is using a Bezier curve. So I decided to make a Bezier curve implementation that's based off the 2.3 structs that are in GameMaker. And what it does is it starts with basically a flat line almost, because the Bezier curves, they take 3 points. There's a start, a middle, and the end, basically. And so it starts with basically the line flat, and then that middle point steps its way up, looking for collisions with the terrain, until it finds a path where it no longer is going to be colliding with the terrain at any point within that curve. So they're able to fire over hills and things smoothly without really too many problems with, shooting into hills and stuff. It does happen a little bit if an enemy is too close to them or things like that. There's some things I got to iron out with it. And another challenge I faced was when enemies are moving quickly at a unit, or just moving in general. The problem was, how do I make the Guardians actually compensate for the speed at which the enemy is moving and actually fire at the position that they think the enemy is going to be at, rather than just the position that they're currently at, so they can actually hit a moving target. And so I also created a system for sort of projecting where the NPC might be at based on their movement speed and other factors, so that when I'm using projectiles in the game, they'll actually hit a moving target. And it took me forever to actually get these animations looking halfway decent. I'm sure that I'll show some clips of how just incredibly buggy the range animations in particular were. Deciding exactly under what conditions I wanted them to fire or stop firing was quite a challenge, because at any point when they're going to fire their bow, their target could easily die. And so it was like, what do I want them to do? Do I want them to go ahead and fire through? Do I want them to just go ahead and shoot, even though their target is dead? Or does there need to be a certain point at which the target's dead way too long? So should they put their arrow back up? Should they just instantly go back to trying to fire again? So what I ended up doing is, if they're already about to go through with the shot, they'll just do it anyway. So shoot anyway. So you do have some issues, or it's not really much of an issue, but you'll have some times where Guardians will seemingly fire at dead bodies. That's because they're already too far along in their animation to really make it even look good for them to stop and go back from scratch. But if they're in the middle of pulling out their arrow and their target dies, they'll simply just reverse their animation and put their arrow back in their quiver. And I actually had to create a new little animation system for that. So now I made a really just generalized animation system where animations can be played forward and they can be played backwards, and they can also ping pong, so they go back and forth. And there's a couple animations that our artist Jaritza is working on that actually use those ping pong animations. So I had to make sure that I had a system in there to be able to utilize that.
To go back to the change and the Guardian animations, it really makes them feel more realistic when they keep their bow held back as they change target. It really helps with the flow of battle, especially when 3 or 4 Guardians are in the battle and they are consistently snapping back to their Addle animation. It just makes it feel more natural when they hold and retarget.
Right, so in the last devlog, I showed off a little bit of the melee Guardian animations. But basically all those Guardians you've seen there were being spawned in with debug buttons, basically. They were very bare bones, as in back then. You couldn't even really select a Guardian with a select box. You had to just click them. And there was a lot of missing animations and stuff like that along. So it was like very ultra basic back then. And they've actually came a long way. Speaking of the glitches with the ranged combat, there's actually a lot of glitches which you couldn't really tell from the cherry-picked footage from the last devlog, but they were ultra glitchy as well, just the melee animations. But back to the way Guardians are going to be spawned in the game. In the game, there's going to be a building called a barracks. Now, a barracks is going to function similar to a settlement center in that you're only going to have one of them. But like the settlement center, as you upgrade, you're going to get more benefits. And now it's not quite as important as the settlement center, which of course gates all of your progress with pretty much everything, but the barracks will allow you to train more and more guardians. So with a barracks, you select the unit that you want to train, being a worker, and then you click on the barracks, or you right click on the barracks, and that worker will then go and start training to be a guardian. And the implementation that I currently have is just as bare bones as possible. In the actual implementation, there's going to be an actual UI window that will allow you to see the training in progress, and allow you to equip your guardians before you actually deploy them out to command. But as you can see on screen, the implementation that we have works now. Just to have that element there, because that is a huge part of the gameplay loop, is balancing your population. How many workers do you got? How many guardians do you got? And another function of the barracks is to determine how much of your population can actually be guardians. So based on the level of the barracks, that will determine what percentage of your population can be guardians. Starting at level 1, I think you can have 2 guardians. And as you upgrade your houses, as you build more houses, that number will increase. And by the time you get to level 5 barracks, you could actually have 100% of your population be guardians. For what reason you'd want to do that, I don't know. But it would be possible. We had many battles over that.
Barracks at one point in development were forbidden by chess, and you would have to spawn in a guardian from the start and pray that you didn't regret that decision later. I felt strongly against that because in late game you may find that you need more of one unit type, so Chess and I sat down and had a conversation about it. I guess I convinced him well enough for it to be revisited, and now it's put in the game. But you actually have to have resources to create the buildings and produce these troops, which when trees don't respawn is a bit of an issue.
Right, so one of the things that I wanted to make sure I got in the game relatively quickly after that last devlog was the ability for trees to regrow, because what would happen is as you cut down trees, you'd have to go further and further out from your settlement in order to get more wood. And because there's a lot of wolves and stuff out there, you ended up dying a lot. So we wanted to make them a renewable resource, mainly because we didn't feel like you should have to constantly be exploring outward in order to get wood. It should be part of the economy in the same way that producing food should. Because of so many aspects of the game revolve around the player not being at their home base, not managing that stuff. You might be somewhere else in a cave or somewhere far away, worrying about guardians and that. We really wanted it to be as renewable as it could be. That way, that can be a part of your economy that you can set up, and then for the most part leave be. Now that's not to say that trees are going to spawn in exactly as fast as they're being cut down. I think there's still a lot of balancing to do, but as it goes currently, trees will respawn at a rate where it's almost enough to replenish what you're cutting down, but not quite. And that does vary based on the amount of workers you have cutting down trees and such, but we don't want you to set a bunch of people cutting trees and then you're far away doing something else, and you come back and these dudes have cleared like 10 miles of trees out, and they're freaking all running away from wolves and monsters and stuff they encountered 10 miles away from your base because they didn't have any other trees to cut. So in terms of how the trees actually spawn, the actual ground tiles themselves keep track of the amount of trees that can be spawned on them. So in Augury, you'll notice that there's hills, but there's a lot of really flat areas. Each of those flat areas are kind of like their own object. And currently, the way the system works is that those flat pieces of land, they keep track of how many trees can grow on them, and they keep track of the intervals in which the trees spawn. And now the trees start off as babies, and they have 3 growth stages before they become an adult. And if at any time that they are not fully grown, you can build over them as if they aren't there. You can't chop them down, but if you wanted to put a building or something there, that's completely valid. It just means that you'll be missing out on that tree because it's going to despawn when you build over it. And the sprites that you're seeing on screen, they're not final. Those are actually sprites that I created by sort of copying the style of the adult trees, but you can probably see some time-lapse footage of me actually trying to create them. Alright, so some of the feedback that I've gotten from playtesting, i.e. my friends playing the game, a couple other random people, mostly people that I know, they've talked about how slow the game is, and how they feel like at the start, feel like you collect resources too slow, they feel like the progress is a little bit slow. And while we don't want to necessarily just make the game go by super quickly or anything like that, we definitely wanted to give players the option that if they feel like things are going by a little bit too slow, that they can speed things up. So one of the big things that I've recently done is add a game speed mechanic into the game that basically takes all the logic in the game that was time dependent before, and makes it affected by a global game speed variable. So now we have the option to not only speed up the game, but we can also soft pause the game, which is kind of like slow motion, ultra slow motion. And so this allows the player to basically fast forward through some of the more mundane things. So if you're just collecting resources or doing something that would otherwise be pretty dang boring, you can just fast forward. And, you know, that comes with its own risk. But the system itself, we're still working on what values we want to use for the fast forwarding, for the soft pause and things like that. Currently, I think I have ×6 game speed is the fast forwarding. That might be too slow. I doubt it's too fast, but it might be too slow. That's going to depend on some feedback. But really, that variable it can go all the way up to like ×1000, and the game will look ridiculous, but all the logic still functions. But I do think it'll be a good addition to the gameplay, and it definitely makes some of the more mundane parts of the game feel a little bit better. And on top of that, speaking of the quote-unquote soft pausing, that allows you to take a more tactical approach to the game too. So on the flip side, for those that are hardcore players, as they advance in the game and parts of the game get more complex, that'll allow them to stop in the middle of a battle, issue orders, command their guardians to drink certain potions, use certain items, and allow them to sort of take a more tactical approach, almost like a lot like a CRPG approach to the gameplay. If they wanted to do that, if you wanted to get that, you know, technical and into the game, you could get into a battle, pause, do things, start it back up, pause, do things. So I think that for the hardcore player, that will definitely help also, but it'll be completely optional. You know, you can play the game completely in real time if you wanted to do that. And I mean, if you even wanted to, there's nothing stopping you from playing the game completely in fast forward. But I don't know what mad lad would do that.
Right now, you can see the world as far as you'd like, but that isn't the plan for the final game. The world is supposed to feel mystical and eerie. This is where the Pearl and Noise shader I wrote, along with some fancy work from Chess, comes in.
Right, so yeah, currently the way the game has always worked is when you spawn in, the camera is completely unlocked. So if you wanted to, you could go and scroll over basically the whole world, and you could see what's there, see what resources are there. And if you wanted to at that point, you could just restart the game and just, so you find like the optimal quote-unquote seed. Currently there's no actual system like that in place, like seeds and things like that, but you could just keep hitting F12, which is our restart button, until you find like the perfect world for you. But we want the world to feel, like Dustin was saying, a lot more mysterious. We wanted exploration to be a lot more important. So we had talked about Fog of War a long time ago, and I randomly got the urge to implement it one day. And so I was like, hey Dustin, you need to show me how this Pearl and Noise stuff works. And so he came over and was trying to show me the basics of Pearl and Noise, and he was showing me a GML implementation. And that's kind of what started off the whole, we need to find a better way to do this, because there's no way I can do fog and a Fog of War with the GML implementation of it. It just would be too slow. So that Pearl and Noise shader we were talking about earlier, this is actually the first real use for it inside the game that you'll be seeing. What we're doing here is I've got about 4 layers of noise, and me and Dustin kind of sat down together over Discord and like figured out the settings that we wanted the noise to have the particular look that you're seeing. So in the game there is a discovered region, which when you first start, it's just a certain region around that starting spawn area. And as your workers move outward either to the left or to the right, it's going to take that discovered region and expand it. And when you move the camera past those discovered regions, that's whenever all that thick fog will start accumulating onto the camera there. And not only will the fog start accumulating, after a minute, it'll actually stop your camera from being able to move completely. So you're not able to just scroll over the land and see everything like you were before. So if you're needing a particular resource, maybe it's a different type of wood, maybe it's stone or gold, you're going to have to really risk it to go out there and get it, because you're not going to be able to see what's out there. And currently, the only thing that can really get you is wolves, but we have plans on implementing different types of enemies like bears and other maybe undead creatures that might come out at night, and other hostile things that we're not going to get into. So it's definitely going to be a really dangerous world that's going to be very mysterious, and I think that the Fog of War system really adds to that.
Everything shown so far has been during the day purely because there was never actually a day-night cycle implemented in the beginning of the game's development.
So one of the big themes of what's happened since the last devlog is me and Dustin have just got significantly more into shaders. Honestly, probably before the last devlog, we didn't really use any shaders, like period. I mean, I think I might have had the damage flashing for the Guardians and the NPCs fighting each other. I think that might have been about the only shader that was actually implemented into the game. But we've been really getting into, learning how shaders actually work and how we can benefit from them. So one of the big things about the day and night cycle that was, prohibiting us from implementing it was the fact that we didn't know about shaders. But thanks to a lot of research on the forums and also on YouTube, mainly from a guy named Game Reverend, I was able to piece together a sort of a prototype system. This is not final code at all, but like Dustin was saying, this is just going to give us an idea of what we're looking for, and it's going to help implement the other things that are going to be dependent on the day and night cycle, such as different enemy types and stuff that will only be coming out at night, and other mechanics that might be night only. So we needed something there, otherwise it would have been pretty dumb to implement nighttime mechanics when there's no night. Now, one thing about our day and night cycle is, with a lot of other side-scrolling RTS games, such as Grim Knights or Kingdom, they really function more as like a tower defense game where, you build up during the day, and then during the night, there's these waves of enemies that come. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to actually take more of the Minecraft approach, where during the nighttime, it's generally going to be more dangerous. So there's going to be different types of enemies and stuff that spawn out there, but they're not going to be fighting in waves to invade your place every night. And that's not going to be really what the gameplay loop is based around. It's just going to be, you might not want a big group of dudes outside your walls woodcutting at night, because there's going to be a lot more than just wolves to handle at that point. And we are playing around with different design ideas. We're thinking about maybe having units have to rest during the nighttime. There could be that the nights are colder, and so that the actual temperature has an effect on their ability to work and fight and recover stamina and HP. And most likely they will be special story elements or special events that might only happen at night. There might be certain boss encounters or different things that trigger story events that you can only find at night. So it'll be a risk-reward system again, where, it's going to be a lot more dangerous to send your guys out of the walls at night, but you might also get rewarded for doing so based on special story elements or events that happen. Alongside all the sort of bigger systems that I've been working on, there's been just countless other smaller things that I've implemented into the game, so I just wanted to go over some of those really quickly. So the first is that the settlement center now has a queue for creating workers. Mining resources now have a finite amount of resources in them, instead of them being infinite and respawning. There's new placeholder background art that has been implemented, and it's not final, and I've had to go through and sort of stitch them together myself, but there's going to be an actual system involved with that I'm going to get to later. I've also redone a lot of the placeholder UI icons to make them look a little less and I've refactored and cleaned up a lot of the multi-click selecting of the units, which are different little interesting ways that you can select units based on double-clicking or triple-clicking, or using shift or control to select multiple units. I've also added outlines when you're selecting units with a select box. So this adds a little bit more context to the game. There's also outlines for when you're attacking units or trying to select a resource for a worker to harvest. Structure scaffolds now fade in instead of just popping up. The system in and of itself is going to be reworked eventually, but that makes it look a little more nice than what it had looked. Also added a little quote-unquote tutorial screen, which will show you controls that the game has and how to play. A little overview of how to play at least. And hopefully that'll be of interest to the people that will be playing the upcoming closed alpha. I've added an ini file to toggle different preferences and debug options for playtesting. I've added little markers over the targets of selected units so that a player can know what a unit is currently doing. And this isn't final at all, but just it'll allow a player at a glance to see whether or not a unit that they've selected is already cutting wood or mining, or if they're a guardian or they're attacking something. So I've made it where units cannot run again until they've generated at least 1/8 of their total stamina. So before, what would happen is a unit would be running away from an enemy, and then they'd run out of stamina, and they'd walk for like a split second, and they'd instantly try to run again, and they'd run for a split second, and it would be just like a never-ending RuneScape effect of them running, walking. So I've made it where they have to generate a minimum amount of stamina before they attempt to run again. And when units that are already running are commanded to run again, they won't freeze for a second anymore. Before, if you had a units that were selected and they were already running, and then you made them try to run again, they would try to skip back to walking for a split second. So that helps with the smoothness of the gameplay. Holding down shift will now make the camera move faster whenever you're moving it with WASD. I've made it where wolves now actually spawn on the map. As before, there was a certain amount that spawned at the beginning of the game, but no others spawned. But now they actually respawn as the game goes on. So I've added a hotkey period, which will move the camera to the nearest worker, and you can use comma on the keyboard to move to the nearest guardian, and this is a ripoff of Age of Empires. Workers no longer deselect when being told to actually perform an action. Before, if you selected a worker and you were commanded them to harvest wood or to mine, it would deselect them when you did that. And I don't remember what led me to make those decisions when I was 19, but I feel like now it'd be better if they didn't deselect whenever you commanded a unit to perform an action. And I've also added a little placeholder UI in the top left of the screen, which will show you the global resources that your settlement currently has available across all the different storages. And that really helps with knowing whether or not you have enough wood or whatever to be able to upgrade or build a new structure.
As you can see, production of Augury has been slower over the last few months, but not halted. We hope to be bringing you more updates as we progress. We recently hit 100 followers on Twitter, where we attempt to post GIFs and smaller updates semi-frequently, so if you're interested in the development process, go follow us over there. We also have a Discord channel that we hope to be utilizing more in the future. Lastly, if you'd like to support us monetarily, you can become a patron on Patreon. All of these links are in the description below. We hope you enjoyed this update, and we will see you in the next video.